As we are all aware, today we see the automotive industry undergoing the most dramatic changes in history. The industry is transforming from a traditional automotive industry into a mobility service industry. The powertrain has become electric. Governmental-driven regulations are forcing all OEMs to work on the electrification of their fleet due to environmental regulations put in place. Vehicles are now connected. The ecosystem of the smartphones and the Internet of Things has not just reached the car, but it has entered deep into the car. Clearly, the vehicle will become autonomous. The driver assistant functions reach a new dimension, allowing the car for more and more autonomous features.
There's no other way than doing it. I mean, it enables OEM to get the best out of two worlds. You get innovations without paying price premiums to the innovators. So you as an OEM, you get basically the cherry and the cake at the same time. But it makes the life for suppliers very difficult. If we look to innovators like an Aptiv, like a Bosch, like a Continental, they very much benefit from innovations, and these innovations allow them to ask a certain price premium. And this price premium was required to pay for their comparably big overhead, to compensate their, in many cases, not leading edge processes and production cost. So overall, there had been a business case for the suppliers. Now, getting innovations from basically a higher number of suppliers and ramping up competitions makes their situation much, much more difficult.
A tremendous push will come from the Green Deal initiative we have here in Europe. In 2020, an average car, whether it's in alphabetical order, Audi, BMW, Daimler, an average car or a Volkswagen, over 10 years and over 200,000 kilometers in this period, is responsible for, well, causes around 45 to 50 tons of CO2. And grosso modo, now I'm addressing the procurement colleagues. The supply chain is responsible for, roughly speaking, 8-9 tons out of these 45, 50 tons. So my thesis, procurement will get a much broader responsibility and much higher influence in fulfilling all environmental restrictions. And it doesn't matter whether the commodity is metal, plastic, powertrain, software, hardware, chemistry, or whatever. From my point of view, each OEM and each supplier has to put much more attention on the CO2 footprint of each single, tiny, huge, heavy part. This will deeply influence the buyer's decisions and, for sure, the costs. The procurement colleagues must have the chance to get a much deeper insight in all the products, in all the products features, in the processes, how the products are produced, where the raw materials are coming from, a core part of each development designing process.
And I think there are opportunities in the entire automotive industry to take advantage of this, that those solutions are available and could be used more and more. And the way I think about software and automotive, I try to divide it in 3 parts or 3 categories. One category is what I call the general productivity tools, like email, like online meetings, but also a CRM system, an ERP system. So all the systems that you use every day also in purchasing to get your purchase orders out and stuff like that. So those systems, a lot of that can be used as software as a service right now. And the second category I see is the software that is used to develop and test the software that is then needed in and deployed in cars. So everything before start of production, there's a huge tool set that is also software based that is used in that area, where we also start to see some software as a service offerings. Like we do it as Understand AI, part of the DSpace family ourselves. What I'm trying to say is maybe to explain software as a service is mostly about using something without having to start an IT project.
We come from a world where every OEM can specify the things that he wants to have, but he only thinks about start of production. Maybe there's something, okay, we need to do a facelift with some minor changes, but really think, okay, I have product done. That's the time horizon that the industry is looking for. And now the paradigm shift to say, okay, I need to think about the entire life of the vehicle, not stopping at thinking about software as soon as the car is produced, but also caring about bringing innovations after start of productions, fixing the software that is becoming more and more complex. So it's a completely new approach, especially when we look at embedded systems. And if we look at the embedded side of the software world, and I would need to say the industry, none of the players, nor the suppliers, nor the OEMs are ready to really leverage the potential that is there. Starting on the OEM side, changing the mindset. Okay, I want to have what I have in mind, especially exactly in the way I want to have it, more towards what's available, what fits best my needs, and make some compromises on the things that are available. One thing. The other thing is, how can I value or assess the value of a software or of a service? All these things need to change and need to be developed.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I understand the approach, and I just wrote an article from Björn Görke, who is the CTO of Car Software Org, who describes it well, that the core functionality, that's something Car Software Org wants to own in terms of software, but there's also additions to it that have to integrate, because I think he rightly says that smartphones are very important for users. They use it for everything, and they will have the ability to own major aspects of a car, but also build a system that is open to integrate other aspects. And white labeling is, or white boxing is a potential way of making that happen. Yes.
I mean, we speak about increasing complexity, bringing new functionality to the customers, but at the same time, we have still a budget restriction. We cannot spend, as an industry, 20-25% for software or for development of products. So we need to come to a model that enables the industry to have a broader cross OEM usage of IP, and white box software solutions are one part of it. No other way than to do white boxes. A talent that knows what needs to be done, not having it read in a book, but having it done and having the experience. And the other thing is changing the mindset that you cannot know everything at the beginning, but you need to be much more flexible, to a certain extent agile in the development of bringing new features to the market, or complex systems like a domain controller to the market. Like companies like KPIT also have the integration capability, but we need to define, or in the integration effort, there need to be somebody responsible for the integration. we need to define as an industry the role of the integrator, whoever is playing the role at the beginning. This will be a dynamic process that will change over time, but this is for me crucial to make such complex solutions a success in the future.
There is a movement, and it was mentioned already earlier in the software industry, which is agile software development. So being agile is now part of, like, everyone talks about it, and it started about 20 years ago, a bit more than 20 years ago in software development. And there are core values to it, and trust is one of those. And there is a very specific line that they formulated 20 years ago, which works very well with what you just said. It says, put customer collaboration over contract negotiation. And I think that's very hard to do, but I think it's a very important shift that we need to do to be able to be successful overall.
This is something that, at least that's my impression, that had not been in focus of OEM purchasing always. Yes, there are some trustful, long-lasting relationships, but I also witnessed in my work with suppliers as well as OEMs that there is a more single event focused approach in purchasing, saying, okay, I now want to have the best for the company, not looking at what are the projects that are coming after that. So that might be a challenge or a change request to how to approach negotiations in the future. We come, at least that's my impression, we come from a world where we can specify everything in detail. This will not be the case in many cases in the future. So we need to be much more flexible. We need to have a different approach.
What I've seen evolve more and more is that type of flexible pricing that you start with, let's define a first step. Like, the good thing about Agile is that it's an iterative approach. So you can start with something and like work together. And the more you have developed into one direction, the better you will know the price. So I can't solve the problem that if you want to define the total cost at the beginning of the project, I don't think it's possible anymore. That is the big shift. So what I would like to suggest is that we work together, and then along the way, we need to adjust what is it that we really need to build. So there's always two parameters. One is how much does it cost, and the other is what is it actually. So there's always the possibility for a trade-off to say, oh, if it gets too pricey, too expensive, then we should change the functionalities. We call it the features. So this is something that can happen along the way. I see that all the time in software development projects, that which I think can also be applied. The more software gets into cars, the more it can also be applied in the automotive industry.
The first thing that the industry or the OEMs need to do is they need to think in functions.
It is a yes, and I think I can also explain why. So one of the reasons is that the advanced driver assistance systems, or anything that goes in the direction of autonomous driving, there is AI involved in some way. So the most important things that cars need to learn these days is to understand their environments.
AI need to be applied in purchasing itself. Imagine, we have spoken about it at the beginning, we will have much more players and much more smaller contract sizes. So the complexity of the purchasing will be double, quadruple, will be much higher than before. And without automation, you will not be able to handle this complexity. And for me, one way of doing this required automation is somehow using AI. So it will also be a very important part of your future way of working, not only understanding what you're purchasing, you also need to apply it in order to cope with the increasing complexity. Especially looking at the separation of software and hardware, purchasing will need to deal with much more suppliers than before. And the suppliers will be very diverse. You will have small companies, you will have big companies, you will have suppliers that have a very strong process background, but you will also have rather newcomers with a more research-driven background. And so this will increase your complexity as first the number of partners that you need to deal with will increase, and also it will drive the complexity will be much higher as the partners that you have will be very different. Looking a few years ahead, I do see a constant change in this supplier landscape. The landscape is very dynamic. We always have new challenges coming up that will drive new players into the market. At the same time, we will a continuous consolidation process see taking place, that big guys buy smaller companies in order to broaden their product portfolio, to add certain competencies, because they see a certain differentiation point by having this talent, this IP into their own portfolio. So it will be much more complex. It will change over time, and I don't see a consolidation or a change in complexity over the next 15-20 years. So this will be a big challenge for purchasing. That brings me back to the things that we discussed earlier. I strongly believe that we need to automate much more in terms of purchasing in the future. Otherwise, the required organization would be so huge and hard to control and to steer. But actually, there's no alternative than to do something major on this side. I strongly believe that differentiation will, to a very large extent, come from software. So software is for the OEM a very important part, but at the same time, I believe due to budget constraints, none of the OEMs will be able to do everything on their own. So purchasing of software will become more and more important. And at the same time, the complexity that you have to work with as a purchasing department on the software side will be much higher than the complexity that you had to deal with in the past. So there are huge opportunities and huge challenges. And in order to be successful as purchasing department in this field, I strongly believe that you need to be very open-minded, open to new approaches, open to constant change in order to cope with all the challenges that we need to resolve in the next 1 to 3 years.